I'm going to get started, folks, and we're going to kick things off. First of all, I want to thank everybody for joining us today for today's remote work executive briefing. Briefing is brought to you weekly by the Remote Nation Institute as well as Sophia. I'm going to ask folks to go on mute for me while I go through my slides today, and I'm going to leave some time at the end for Q&A. So it's an extraordinary time right now for many of you due to workplace shutdowns. And suddenly you found yourself engaged in remote work in ways that you probably didn't anticipate. We know it's hard on everyone right at this particular point, but one of the reasons that we're running these briefings is because we want to help. My name is Marianne Snow, and as a remote work expert who's launched a lot of remote work programs in my career, I want to provide you with practical information that you can use not only to get your arms around the current remote situation that you're dealing with, but also to position you so that you can build some skills so that you've got resilience in the future. And this will not only have a benefit to you, but also to your organization. So each week we're conducting a 30-minute briefing, and this briefing is set up to have actionable information that's relevant to the current situation and what's happening in the world today, so that you can take those tips and take that information and bring it back into your workplace, wherever that might be. It might be on your kitchen table, or it could be in your unfinished basement, or who knows. People are working from all sorts of different places these days. Now, we've chosen to use Microsoft Teams as our broadcast platform. And we've done that on purpose because we want to give you a little chance to practice with some of these tools. And while we know that there are tons of tools out there, we also know that many of you in the business world are working with Microsoft systems anyway. So we've chosen to work with Microsoft in order to be able to really speak to a business audience that we work with on a routine basis. Every single week, we'll be going through this tip, and the format will always be the same. We'll do a little bit of content, kind of bring you up to speed on some of the things that are happening in the world today. And then I'm going to leave some time for questions so that we can answer things that are top of mind for you. So one of the challenges that people who have with remote work, particularly people who have not engaged in remote work themselves, is what happens when the team goes remote and now you have to hold them accountable. So you're a team leader who has to go through the process of setting expectations and really holding people accountable for producing work, and then evaluating their performance in relation to the productivity that you're trying to achieve. So we're going to go through and talk a little bit about the reality today in terms of productivity and how it's being impacted. Talk about ways to set up realistic performance indicators, those KPIs, key performance indicators that we've always used in a business setting to hold our employees accountable. And then how do you implement structured accountability to keep your team on track? So our experience with our clients this week is that this week is still in chaos, but things are starting to settle down. We're moving to a new normal. And while the last couple of weeks have been very disorienting for a lot of people, and there is still a little bit of a scramble for tools, the plain fact is that things are settling down. People want to get back to a routine. And what's happening at the moment is that work lives and home lives are colliding in weird and interesting ways. But productivity is still suffering because folks are in a position where they're trying to figure out what the new reality is. And while video usage is skyrocketing, and we've heard this from our partners, not only at Microsoft Teams, there's been exponential growth, but also we've heard it from Zoom, we've heard it from additional platforms like Join Me and GoToMeeting. Pretty much anybody who is in a remote work situation is trying to adopt video technology as fast as possible, because again, it really kind of adds that human element. For many, home bandwidth is still a big problem, which means regardless of what your strategy is, as you are adopting video platforms, make sure that you're adopting a video platform that also has audio join capabilities. It's got some sort of a telephone number that's associated with it, because right at this particular moment, if you are in a low bandwidth circumstance, if you can get into a call, even if you're doing it through your phone, you're still going to be able to be part of the conversation and part of that interactivity. But it's going to be really important that if you're the meeting organizer, that you're recognizing that there's still a little bit of chaos when it comes to technology. Work priorities have been really very slow to shift, and one of the things that we're hearing across all of our clients right now is that they're still being bombarded with things that are not related to workforce shutdowns, but seem so trivial in comparison to some of the real crises and the real day-to-day challenges that people have that they're dealing with. So we're going to talk a little bit about that and how we need to clear those out for people so that we can hold them accountable to things that are really relevant today. And then how are the personal lives and the work lives colliding in crazy and weird ways? Because it is quite typical now for every person that I'm talking to have experienced a human moment where a cat walked over a keyboard, or one of your kids made noise, or you've got environmental noise outside your dining room window that is impossible to block out right at this moment in time. So how are work meetings shifting so that they're being more accommodating to personal stuff? And then just remember, there's a lot of distractions right now because people are trying to figure it out. They're getting new routines, and they're starting to get their remote work sea legs under them, but they're still encountering new things. So one of the top priorities that we're asking you to think about as you're saying to yourself, how do I get my people back to work, and how do I get them really focused on productivity and getting back into a routine so we can get them work focused and get them calmed down? Well, the first thing that we are suggesting and recommending to our clients is reevaluating your work priorities now. Really looking at anything that's not business critical and finding ways to postpone, eliminate, or just reallocate non-essential tasks for now. How do we back burner those things so that anybody who is in the field, if they're getting requests for participation in projects, that they're really feeling that those projects are aligned with the current circumstance? And then as you make those decisions within the organization, making sure to communicate the whys behind these decisions so that folks who have been working on these tasks can be redeployed in meaningful ways, and also so that they understand that it really has nothing to do with them that these things are being sidelined for the moment, but it is really more related to the circumstance. So how do we reposition and reprioritize? And then the next really critical factor is, how do we set up new key performance indicators, or how do we set things up so that we know how to evaluate a remote workforce when we're unfamiliar with how you check on performance, how you evaluate performance, and how you just objectively look at how your remote workforce is working at any given point in time. And the first thing that for any of you who are new to these environments, who have never actually run remote teams, worked in remote teams before, and maybe you've had dispersed employees, but they haven't been primary for you. The first thing we're going to ask you to do is check your assumptions at the door, because remote work is still work, and lots of productivity can be had from remote teams and folks who are working from home, because first of all, it's the only option most people have right now. So we're basically saying, let's get over the shock of it, and let's get focused on what's possible in these environments. And then the second piece is just the antiquated notion that somehow having a physical presence makes you more productive, which we all know that this is just not the case. That performance should really be tied to concrete things that are job specific, and they're indicators that are associated with delivering product, delivering results, delivering product, delivering on key timelines, milestones, and things that are tied to actual work. That means work responsibilities, existing timelines for projects that are still relevant, new work priorities in relation to the current situation with the workplace shutdowns and the work from home situation. And then now let's put a remote work layer on it. For example, how are you setting up expectations associated with when somebody's going to be available and when they're not going to be available? Just because they're out of sight doesn't mean that they should be available 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Remember, you've got employees that are dealing with childcare issues, that are they might be managing poor technical infrastructures, and so their jobs are taking a little bit longer than they would typically. And you're also looking at individuals who now have to collaborate with folks primarily through technology. And so they are forced into a remote situation, but now they're forced into a remote collaboration situation. So how are they interacting with others? How are they adapting to these new circumstances? How are they presenting themselves not only to you, but also to other people within the team? But ultimately, what it boils down to when you're thinking about how do you evaluate any performance of any employee, it really should be based on the work they do and how they deliver the results. And so whether they're in an office or they're in a remote work situation, these key indicators should always be tied to job performance, work responsibilities, and the cultural requirements that you're setting up for anybody who's working in a remote work situation. So how do you set up that structure? What are you going to do? How are you going to situate your people so that they understand what's expected of them, but also so that you know how to hold them accountable? Structure the accountability in a way that you're setting expectations up front. Appreciate that when you're working with a remote team and remote professionals, you got to shift your role. This is not a command and control situation. This is a partnership situation. It's a collaboration situation where you and your remote employee are sitting down and you are negotiating expectations upfront. And whether we're talking about expectations around how are you going to manage your childcare issues while you manage your work responsibilities, how are you going to manage your availability if you're working from home, if it's related to time or any sort of milestones that you've set up for prioritized work responsibilities, all of these sorts of things. Hammer it out, figure it out, communicate them to the employees themselves, have a negotiated conversation so that then you can move to the next stage, which is now it's your job as the person who has has worked to get agreement from your remote employee to observe behaviors based on concrete indicators that tell you if they are executing on the expectations that you've set up. This means that you're shifting from, geez, I've set somebody up, I can send them off and I can watch, how they work and what they're doing and how they're spending their time, to really kind of going to a situation where you're sending somebody off to what could be considered a big black hole. You don't know exactly what they're up to. So now you have to evaluate and kind of observe based on other indicators. How are they showing up to meetings? How are they communicating to yourself and other folks? Are they meeting the terms of the agreement in terms of expectations and job obligations? Are you noticing delivery? What's the quality of the work? That allows you to be able to provide honest, objective, and relevant feedback through both video and audio channels, so that you have an opportunity to stay in close contact with your folks, particularly at the beginning of this process, because remember, this is new for you, it's new for them. And so the more that you can give them feedback so that they know how they're doing, they can regain their confidence, they can get their feet under them, and they can position themselves so that they're going to be less anxious about what you think, and they're also going to be a little less likely to second guess themselves. If you're moving from a command and control situation, or let me tell you what to do and then I'll be here if you need help situation, and you're really positioning somebody to be a little bit more self-sufficient, appreciate that you don't just want to observe when they're failing or when they're falling down, and you don't just want to provide feedback when something isn't done well. You also need to recognize when they're doing good stuff, when they're acting independently, when they're showing good judgment, when they're behaving in appropriate ways, making sure that your people are also hearing that you're noticing these things as well. Because the more that you can observe your folks and deliver feedback on a routine basis, and frankly, when you start setting up expectations at the very beginning, you should also be saying to them, here's what you can expect. I'm going to observe your behavior. I'm going to provide you feedback. You and I are going to learn about this process along the way, but you'll always know where you stand with me because we're going to be in pretty continual contact. That means, how do you really work with your individual team members to make sure that they're getting comfortable with feedback? And this is important because it's a big cultural shift. When you're working with a structured accountability format and your role shifts to more of a coach, more of a person who is really helping people by providing them with some sort of a sense of what you're seeing in their performance in relation to the expectations you've set up. This is going to be a new type of framework that a lot of people are not really comfortable with. So how do you observe the reaction to feedback? How do you help people understand that it's part of the structured process of making sure that the remote employee understands the framework for how their performance is going to be judged and how they're going to be evaluated on a routine basis? And then as you go along, keep good records of yourself and note some trends. Are you noticing that people are on track? Are they off track? Are they sticking to what they need to stick to? Can they stay on task? And that will allow you to be able to continue to hone your feedback so that people are going to actively see you taking an interest in the work that they're doing, but also the way that they're doing it. By actively listening throughout this process. And that means, being honest with people about how you're feeling about stuff, but also listen to their concerns and their frustrations. And that will allow you to be able to get more information about how you can remove barriers so that they can complete tasks more effectively. And then if you're noticing that it's impossible for them to complete some things, given the current circumstance, how do you reprioritize things so that it's possible for someone to move forward and be able to complete their job as effectively as possible? The goal here, folks, is to make sure that your folks always know where they stand. And that's going to be important because remember, these are human beings that we're dealing with. And we talked about this in last week's briefing, but it begs mentioning again. The more that you can connect with your folks on a human level, because remember, if you've got people who are used to working in an office and suddenly they're not in an office, they're feeling disoriented, they're feeling anxious, they're probably in the midst of a little bit of a change cycle where they're feeling a little angry, a little frustrated, a little bit of grief about the fact that this new normal was not something that they necessarily asked for. So the more that you can improve the circumstance by staying in contact, using video, using people's names, and then remember, show your human side too, because you're dealing with this circumstance just like they're dealing with it. So the more that we can use humor to just mitigate some of the tension and reduce some of the stress, and let people know that it's okay when their dog barks in the midst of a situation. Certainly, I was talking to a client yesterday who was commenting to me about the fact that they were trying to do an important briefing with a senior group, and her 2-year-old walked in the middle of that circumstance and was yelling for his mom because he wanted some juice. And in that particular situation, she was feeling the pressure of apologizing to the folks that she was presenting with, but she had a very senior person intercede and tell her that she didn't have to be worried about this, that he understood that this was an extraordinary circumstance, and everybody got a good chuckle. The tension was broken, and they were able to refocus on the business work at hand, and also do it in a way that allowed people to feel validated and included. Now, you're not going to be able to do this all yourself. This is going to be really, really important, and we're going to continue to stress this. Peer-to-peer connections are particularly important in remote work situations. And last week I had mentioned that, in the old days, before there were distribution lists, technology distribution lists, you could set up call tree systems to accelerate information sharing by having one person pass information on to one or two other people, who then passed information on to one or two other people. This is a situation where call tree systems in our environment are going to be very, very critical, because particularly if you're working with larger groups of folks and you can't get to everybody all at once, it's going to be very important that some human touches the next human so that there is human to human contact. And this is really starting to be very interesting, because we're setting up networks with our clients where we're teaching small groups of folks how to use things like video technology and how to moderate a video conference. And then we're having them teach other people the same, but again, it's like peer teaching peer. And we're elevating this so that in the work situations on a daily basis, when we're not around to answer questions, somebody has somebody that they can go to that will help them to be able to move themselves forward. So at this particular time, I'm going to take a step back, and I'm going to stop sharing my screen at this particular moment. And I'm going to go back to the group, and I'm going to ask if we have any questions on any of the stuff that we've talked about today. and I'll take a couple of questions, and then I'll do a quick wrap up at the end and let everybody go so that they'll be able to get out to their weekend.
Thanks, Marianne.
Hi, Bobby. Do you have a question for me?
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that was a great presentation, but one of the things I'm, not yet having to deal with, but worried about is, what happens when things go south and, in the grand scheme of all that's going on, how do I communicate? Okay, that isn't good, or that wasn't great right now. And it just seems so unimportant in the grand scheme of what's going on.
And I can very much appreciate that people are going to be reluctant to hold folks accountable for bad behavior, say, in these circumstances, because obviously, to your point, it seems almost like there's bigger fish to fry, right? In the general scheme of things, seems kind of small. But one of the things that I would say to you, Bobby, is that in this circumstance, if you've set expectations up front, and you're giving feedback on a routine basis, the advantage that you have is you're going to be able to nip it in the bud when it's relatively small, and you're doing it in the framework of we had discussions about expectations. I want to check in with you and make sure that you're comfortable with those expectations, that you're able to execute on those expectations. And if you got a problem, let's talk about it. So especially the first time around, it's not necessarily a discipline problem, but it might actually be something where someone's afraid to tell you that they're having problems they didn't anticipate, or they're just trying to work out the fact that their kids are getting off the bus at a particular time of the day, and that's what's disrupting things. So the first conversation is a coaching conversation. Help me understand, this expectation wasn't met. Let's talk about it. Are there things that are happening that are preventing you? Is the expectation not clear? So it's a great opportunity to kind of listen and hear and potentially solve problems. And then one of the things we talked about is take some notes, because if you're having the same conversation once and the same conversation twice and the same conversation a third time, then now you're going to escalate things. So it's less about coaching and it's more about disciplinary action. And at that point, I would say reach out to your HR people, get them involved. Because disciplinary action should follow your company's protocol for how you're going to hold someone accountable if they are consistently not meeting expectations. And so show compassion, but also hold people accountable.
Great. Thank you.
You're welcome. Do we have any other questions right now?
I was wondering about the work day, the time frame, because with everyone being able to communicate in so many different ways, is there a way to sort of make it so that we only email between these, we only communicate between these hours or something like that, so that we can actually get something done?
Carrie, I really appreciate that you asked that question, because in a remote work environment where you might have email, you might have chat, you might have texting, you could have group distribution lists, you might be on say for example on an integrated Office 365 platform, you could be getting hit a million different ways with lots of different communications. This is one of the great things about setting those expectations up front, having candid conversations with people about what is okay and what's not okay in terms of availability and schedule, but also how are you going to manage making sure that people have time for the work process. So having those conversations at the beginning and then tweaking them as you go, so that in that that coaching conversation that you're having with folks, because remember, this is a back and forth. You're having a lot of back and forth communication with your people. You have an opportunity, first of all, to really evaluate those expectations in real time, so you can figure out if they're actually practical, because they might have seemed practical in the discussion, but they might be much less practical in real life. But also, how do you let your people know that it's okay to put their hand up and say, I need your help with something. I need to be able to shut things off for a period of time this part of the day so that I can get this business critical function done in order to be able to meet my expectations that we've set up. So can you help me with that? And making sure that there's a free flow of information back and forth that's honest about what's possible and what's not possible right now. So thank you very much, Carrie.
Great, thank you.
So at this time, we're just about at our half-hour point. I don't want to keep anybody longer than our scheduled time, but I did want to let everyone know how much we appreciate you coming into these calls. We hope that you're finding them really useful and helpful in this sort of crazy time. And we hope that you'll come back and join us every Friday. And don't be afraid to email us if you have any specific questions during the week. You can contact me at masnow@sophaya.com. That's masnow@sophaya, SOPHAYA.com. And we hope that you stay safe, be well, and have a great weekend. We'll talk to you again next Friday. Thanks for coming.